Among the most significant features of Fanon's Adai colonialism is the attention given to the changing perception and roles of Algerian women and the struggle for liberation. Fanon is forthright about the restrictions against women and the Algerian family and society. He also analyzes the degree to which the Algerian Revolution demanded that women move from the margin toward the center in the war against colonial rule and for liberation. Consequently, Fanon goes beyond one of the main limitations of mainstream Western feminism, insofar as he recognizes that difference is never exclusively or even primarily sexual. Fanon perceives the multiple dimensions of the Algerian woman's situation as both an Algerian and a woman, and the fact that her struggle for liberation takes place on both fronts. Now,
colonialism of Fanon's analysis brings to humanity a deep dehumanization, a collective descent away from the spontaneity, creativity, and exuberance that spark and sustain growing cultures. As he develops his distinctive account, Fanon calls attention to a change in the landscape that struggles for liberation been able to eventuate. One that begins to transform what are at first episodes of resistance into more enduring freedom, and that carry nations towards something like their fuller nationality, bringing stability to the struggle for the growth of national culture may be becoming increasingly urgent now in the decades since Fanon's writing, as former colonizing agents continue in their needs for labor, markets, and capital investment in circumstances turned post-colonial. This paper argues that Fanon does not narrow his focus to the initial emancipatory moments. Rather, he casts liberation as an ongoing struggle to fight against the new inertia of a post-colonial present, as well as that of the colonial past. A struggle to generate a momentum, force, and dynamism around the spirit and consciousness in which resistance first emerged. Because of this approach, Fanon comes to face the problem of the maturity of a broader movement for human liberation, its rise from protest onto a plane of sovereignty. To support this transportation from the episodic to the epical, Fanon layers his analysis with conceptions of decadence, actionality, and character, whose relations of influence with philosophical neighbors Paget Henry and Friedrich Nietzsche reveal a picture sharpened by the past and still speaking to the new post-colonial legacy of destabilization, spreading racialized hatred and contempt in our time.
That's the way I understood your argument, and I would agree with it, that violence in the end is the only option, the only path to creating what you said, an unedited identity, a new identity. And then part of that question is, I'm wondering, does that violence, is that in a turn, is there a potential of becoming imprisoned again in a specific form of identity formation?
But this is another dimension of violence. This is not violence against domination or against racism or against white people. This is violence with my own body and with history of domination that I have incorporated in my body. So I have to make violence in my movement, in my body, to create a new movement and a new form of life. And you know, this is a reference to Sartre. And in Lettres et le Néant, Sartre talk about the mechanism of la mauvaise foi. For example, Le Garçon de Café, do you remember Le Garçon de Café is in a way of imitate or is in a way of reproduction of the identity of Garçon Café, and this is a mechanism. And Fanon is against this way and think about the violence against the mechanisms of reproduction of domination. So I have to make violence with me and with me, my incorporate, yes.
So it's a self-directed violence.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could elaborate, Tom, on why the multiplication of destabilized polities is something that we shouldn't see as apocalyptic.
I guess part of what I found in writing the paper to be so sort of distinctive in Fanon's approach is that there's sort of two levels of violence in a way. There's just the violation of certain kinds of, practices and expectations. That's a violation of its own. But there's a secondary change that happens indirectly that Fanon is so careful to describe, which is a sort of moving past this inertia that develops around coping with colonial occupation. And actually altering that inertia is a stickier thing. And Fanon is sort of exploring and dealing with the pitfalls, how kind of problems can return. So I would just say that because Fanon brings the discussion to a point where you can recognize a possibility of continuing to open these spaces, that's why it's not an apocalypse.
What about your analysis, right? Suggests that this is feminist rather than a kind of accurate reading of the situation of women. In other words, what are the conditions of possibility which allow us to distinguish, let's say, a kind of accurate reading of women from a feminist reading? And this is one that I ask you with the following context in mind, right? How to think about recognizing women as a project which may be both connected but distinguished from the project of something which I will loosely call North American feminism.
I think that I would say an accurate reading of women and what they have done is a part of feminism, but it's not all of what it is, right? And so just because you recognize what women have done would not mean that your text is necessarily feminist, but that's certainly a part of what the Black Feminist Project is, right? So it's looking at how Black women have been erased or ignored from various projects, various movements, whatever the case may be. So in that sense, I would identify that as one of the principles or tenets of Black feminism, but not the only one that would need to be fulfilled to identify Fanon as a feminist. So I think at this stage with Fanon, I'm toward the Fanonian feminism, but cannot quite answer yet yes that Fanon is a Black feminist.